The thing about Iboga and our brains I hear a lot when people talk about it is the idea of increasing neuroplasticity, making different connections, and to me, those can be all kinds of connections. And really, they are best when they're the connections that you want them to be, not the connections you feel like you should be making or you need to make. And so, for me, some of the connections that I like to make involve literature, because I like to read. And, I've done a previous video about a book with Freud, with one of Totem and Taboo. But today I was thinking about Marcel Proust and his book In Search of Lost Time. And I've got this companion text that goes along with In Search of Lost Time. It's called Paintings in Proust. It was recommended to me by a friend of my cousin who was also reading Proust. And anyway, it's a wonderful book, and it really informed my reading of Proust, because the author in the book, they show you every painting mentioned by Proust throughout each successive part of the book, which is, if you don't know, it's in 7 parts. His book In Search of Lost Time, and it's considered to be like the longest novel ever written, and it's very deeply interior. And so, honestly, some of what I say right now, if you haven't read Proust, might not make a whole lot of sense, but hopefully it will. I just want to make some connections. So anyway, in this book, Paintings in Proust, what the guy does is he shows every single painting mentioned in every book, each of the 7 volumes, and in order, and then gives a little bit of contextual information about the painting and where Proust might have actually seen it when he was alive, when and where. And one of the things he says in the introduction of this book is that apparently Proust, in a letter, discussed how he had gone to see an exhibit by Monet, who was a friend of his Water Lilies series, and while he was viewing them, thought to himself, imagined what an impressionistic work of literature might be like, and so conceived that he could write about one single moment in the mind of the narrator, and dwell on it over and over again, and essentially view it from like as many angles as he could conceive of. And so we get an impressionistic view of the feeling that the narrator might be having. And famously, if you've ever tried to read the book, the first 50 pages concern the narrator as a child attempting to go to bed and not being able to go to sleep because he wants his mother to come up and give him a goodnight kiss. But she won't do it because his father has said that he's too old for that kind of thing, which I believe he's like 10. And that he has told the mother, don't do it. Don't go up and give him a goodnight kiss, And so the boy is just sitting up there in bed, just laying there, thinking about how he can't go to sleep without this goodnight kiss. Something that he's had like every night that he can remember, like his whole life. It's been part of their like this ritual he's had with his mother, which the father finds to be infantile, and that he needs to grow up and stop being such a little baby and all of this kind of thing. And honestly, as you're reading it, like my first time reading it, and this is other people have expressed this even in reviews at the time, is that at first you sort of feel like some sympathy for the boy, but then by like 50 pages of this you're like, oh my god, like I see where the dad is coming from, like maybe you need to just get over this. But anyway, it creates this view, and that ends up being very like important to the style of the rest of the book, because that every situation ends up being like that, just dwelt upon over and over and over again from every conceivable angle, and it just takes forever, to like get through it, to like get through. I mean, that nothing is happening, like that whole 51st pages I just described. The little boy's just laying in bed the whole time, like nothing happens. It's all just in his head, and that's how the whole book is. Everything is just all in his head, like. Events happen, but then he can't move from one to the next without like dwelling on it at length. And so it makes for a glacial pace to the book, which is intentional. It's supposed to be like that, and it's supposed to require like a lot of your attention to be able to like pay attention to the pay attention to the I think that's train of thought. And I think it really says something. It reveals some truths about the human condition, the urgency of our desire, the fear of loss, and these things, these two things, like these competing feelings that seem to motivate all of our endeavors, the urgency of our desire, fear of loss. And yet at the same time, I read Blood Meridian recently because I had seen a YouTube video, I believe, about how Cormac McCarthy apparently hated Proust and all of this interiority, and that he intended to write a style of literature that was completely different than that, and in which the characters had no interiority and could only be judged on their words and their deeds, which is, of course, there's something very true about that, since we can't know anyone else's mind and we can only judge each other on our words and deeds. And honestly, since no one can really know what's in our mind, that's how we'll be judged as well. We may try to put it down, in the way that Proust has given this incredible window to the mind of his narrator, but at the same time, that narrator's life, really by anyone outside of him, will be judged based on what he did, what he said, and not what he thought. And that's true for all of us, and so one of the things I think that really stands out to me about that and about Blood Meridian is that, what does Cormac McCarthy choose to focus on? If that's true, if we're only can be judged by our words and deeds, well, he chooses to focus on extreme violence, at least in Blood Meridian, and in many of his other books too. But that book in particular is just so violent, and the characters in it are so starkly evil in what they do and say, that it calls to me what it does, in relation to Proust, is essentially suggest that what Proust is showing us is not the truth, that it's eliding the truth, that by showing this comedy of manners of French society, this the deep interiority of this this rich young boy, that what we don't see is the violence that sustains all of that. And I'm thinking about the fact that the time period which Proust is writing about, the 1890s, commonly known as the Belle Epoque, the beautiful era in French and European society, but particularly in Francophone European society, France, Belgium. That era was when King Leopold of Belgium was carrying out the greatest Holocaust that had ever happened in modern history, by killing 11 or so million people in the Congo and destroying and erasing whole cultures and civilizations, that this is how we inaugurated the 20th century, was with that. What and France called that the beautiful era, because they were not thinking about the truth of what actually sustained their culture and civilization, the colonial violence, that it was men like King Leopold and Cecil Rhodes and these like late Victorian marauders that like created wealth, in that era. And that was the wealth that sustained Proust and all of the characters in his book and stuff, and that's true for us today, of course. This is the thing, is that that level of colonial violence has become like something that is part of our lives too, and that we don't want to think about, and that is done on our behalf, ostensibly, by the same ruling class that was doing it back in the 1890s. These are the same people, and so I can see where McCarthy is coming from in his critique of Proust, which, Proust even addresses this at the beginning of part 2 of In Search of Lost Time, the second book. There's a scene where the narrator and his family are having dinner with this man who's like a general, and he's somebody that the narrator really looks up to, and the narrator has been reading the work of this man Burgot, who he really loves, and before the dinner he has this like plan to bring up his like studies of Burgot as a way to like show how learned and stuff, well read he is, to this general, because he wants to like impress him. And so then when he does at the dinner, the general is like not impressed. Actually, he says that he hates Burgot and thinks he's a terrible writer, because all he does is just dwell on like a comedy of manners and this interiority, and like thinking he can just like dwell on beauty, while all around him the world is like got all of this like stuff going on, all of this like violence and war and manly pursuits and things like that, and that like that's what somebody should be writing about, and not this like interiority and stuff. And so it's Proust, of course, in the book, like casting this Burgot like that's him, and his narrator is like talking about the style of writing that is being employed at that very moment by Proust in his book. And it's Proust anticipating or encountering, really, I'm sure there was probably critics of his that had said something like that. And so here he is like addressing that critique in his work, and basically making a case that meditating on beauty, doing this impressionistic take on literature, is valuable, and has aesthetic, cultural significance and value because of its ability to reveal these truths about the human condition, and I think he's right about that, and like, so for me, like, I have, just to bring it back to what I mentioned Iboga at the very beginning of this, because like, I feel like I believe two things that are true that are in opposition to each other. I can deeply identify with both sides of it, and like, it's so interesting to me that like my interest and ability to read challenging literature, something that like I've always tried to do, but like Iboga has helped me to see connections between the things that I'm reading in ways that I did not before, and helped me to see global contexts around the things that I'm reading, and to make personal connections with it. I mean, here I am talking about what's happening in the Congo, and like connecting what I read about what was happening in the Congo in the 1890s to what I was reading about with Proust, to my own experience of having like eaten this plant that is grown in the Congo and nearby, and like that just, I don't know, like it makes me really grateful that I had the opportunity to eat Iboga. Like and there's all this stuff, in the news and all this business with like fucking Trump and shit, like talking about Ibogaine and this stupid motherfucker, like Rick Perry, what a joke. These people have no idea what they're talking about. Not that I do, but like I'm not going around trying to pretend like I'm some disciple, that like I've been tasked with this by God and all of this business. Like, these dudes are high. And here's the thing. Iboga has the energy of a trickster. Has a lot of different things, but part of its energy, like all of plant medicine, is that of a trickster. And so, Rick Perry may think that he knows what he's doing, or he may, whatever Rick Perry thinks he's going to get out of this, ultimately he will be humbled. Like that, I would bet on. I would go to Kalshi and bet on this if it were possible. Like that man will be humbled by his association with this, and it will not go as he sees. It will not be what he wants it to be. I would put money on that. Not really, but metaphorically. And I don't know why I started talking about that, but Iboga is something that calls people, and I guess Ibogaine does the same. I don't know. I've never taken Ibogaine. I've only eaten Iboga root bark. But it's got its own reasons, is the thing, like I do, I would say, unlike Rick Perry, I believe in animism, and maybe he's coming around on that, I don't know, but I think the plants, and this plant in particular, have a design, of their own, have their own designs, and what our role in them is not really open to us. We can't really understand what it is. Certainly not a white man from the West, I mean, like, I wouldn't say that about like a Ngunga from Gabon, you know, I think they have a much clearer idea about what the plant's designs are, and I would listen to them about that. But Rick Perry doesn't give a shit about that, and you know, these people evangelizing about curing the troops from all of their pain from this like carrying out the agenda of imperialism. It's like, you know, not that we don't all deserve some healing from our pain, of course, but like the designs of the plant Iboga are much greater, I would contend, I would suspect at least, than simply to help U.S. veterans feel better about themselves, you know, or to help any of us, certainly of the West, me, you know, U.S. born people, to feel better about themselves. You know, its designs are grander than that, but if we get helped along the way, good. And if we can help back, even better. You know, but I don't know. I read some article where some man who's part of this with Rick Perry and this Hubbard character, some man said he had a vision. I think this is after he like had some bufo or something. You smoked that, I presume. You smoked some bufo. You took Iboga or Ibogaine and then smoked bufo. Not that there's anything wrong with that, you know. I don't mean to talk derisively about it, but he had some. In this article I read from Rolling Stone, he said he had some vision of himself, like with like disciples or something, and it just sounded so egocentric and so like, you know, centering your own experience, your own like purpose in all of this, which like, bro, no, I do not agree. Should not be centering our own purpose. Like this is really the thing about something like Iboga and trying to have purpose around working with the medicine in some way, like I am trying to do. I would say that like my hope anyway for myself in this is that I would put helping people and helping the medicine, like that's the primary thing, not necessarily what I can like find as purpose for my own life, you know. That task would be one that I would do because I'm like trying to pay back what I've received, you know, the gifts that I've received, that I can help to pay that forward, pay it back, whatever, forward or back, you know, that I can give back, basically. That would be the idea, not necessarily so that I can like take. You know, I feel like that this is the tension though around any kind of like attempt to do something for money, you know. When does it become more about the money than like the mission, whatever. So anyway, those are my thoughts today. Basi.